this is a very important subject to me. You have to understand this what we're talking about right now is one of my key things that I base everything that I do on. Our culture was passed on one generation to another through stories, but it was also passed on through just how people lived. And, how did you learn to cook a certain way? Well, you cooked that way because your parents cooked that way. How did you relate to different family members? So we have the example of everyday activity, and we also have the stories which give them meaning and help us to understand why certain things were the way they were. So I have two really quick illustrations of what I'm talking about. When I was a child, growing up in the Seattle area, it meant a lot to me that I would one day grow up and learn how to be an Indian. And, I took as much information as I could from all different sources, and I'm sure Harvest has gone through the same situation. Because we didn't have our stories, I would go see a movie like Little Big Man, and I would say, oh, well, that's what it is to be an Indian. And I can even remember I had this silly little book based on the song 10 Little Indians. And there was this image of some little boy, or two little boys actually, two little Indians, right? And they're worshiping the sun, it says. And, so one of them has something in his mouth, and he's, looking up at the sun. And I'd go outside. I'm 5, 6 years old. I would go outside, and I said, well, that's what you're supposed to do, because that's what Indians do. I mean, I didn't really understand that the way I was being raised was Indian. When I read all of those stories, and also as I started to get into storytelling as a teenager, I began to realize that I was living my life every day as an Indian, every single day, before I even knew what it was. And so the stories are an affirmation of who you are. There's nothing wrong with you. You are living certain patterns that are ancient. They've been this way forever. And the reason why the assimilation process became so destructive, and I literally blame this for starting the death spiral of Indian people, because we're being told to live by all of these rules that are new to us, and we don't know why, because we don't have the stories that underlie these different rules that we don't believe in. We're also being sort of discouraged from following the examples of our own stories. And in many ways, these things are being taken from us so that we're separated. And we have a situation where I'm a little boy in a front yard thinking that I'm supposed to worship the sun because there's a song that says that I should, without having any clue that I was more authentically Indian, not knowing that, than what the song was trying to give me. So the stories reinforce what's happening in the day-to-day of our lives. And that was under attack. And somebody, William Bainin was the name of the native person who went around to all of the villages of the Tsimshian people. And at that time, I think there was probably about 25 villages at that time. And he went around to every single one of them and recorded all of the stories. And he did this because people were beginning to realize 100 years ago that some little boy might listen to some stupid song and get the wrong idea You got to do all these crazy things in order to be an Indian. And it was there was a lot of foresight there, because the 2 or 3 generations following all of these stories being recorded are the generations that were removed. I mean, the stories were all recorded, but now nobody's telling them. And they're sitting in a box somewhere, collecting dust. And, we're all trying to be good little white boys and girls, because that's what, the powers that be want us to do. The church wants us to be good little Englishmen or good little Americans. And we're penalized if we're not. We can't be those things because we don't understand the ancient rhythms that created good little white boys and girls. So we can't plug into that. So we're going to fail every time, and we don't understand it anyway. And as it turns out, there's no reason to be. So this is, you're picking a subject here that I'm really passionate about. The second illustration of this, if the first one wasn't good enough.
It was beautiful, by the way.
Oh,
thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. There was I'm not going to name the tribe because this tribe has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. But about 20 years ago, I was hired at the tribal school to try and jazz the kids a little bit in culture. Now, at this particular tribe, there was a lot of things going on to promote the powwow culture and to promote powwows in general, and kind of the same thing I was talking about before, the little big man idea of what an Indian is. I love that movie, by the way. Don't anybody say Little Big Man's a bad movie. It's a good movie. But, when this is your idea of what an Indian is, and it's completely removed from anything that you've experienced in your own life, well, what are you going to do? You're going to think you're not an Indian because you don't live that way and you don't think that way, and this isn't who you are. So what happened at this tribal school, and this was a little less than 20 years ago, is these kids had the idea that the powwow and the powwow way and everything powwow was their culture. And, the tribe was actually pouring resources into this. Now, we're talking about a tribe in Western Washington, not South Dakota, not Minnesota. And I actually created some problems among the administrative staff of this tribe because they didn't get what I was talking about. I'm like, what we want to do is we want to have these kids put on a traditional potlatch that would be traditional for this tribe. And, it all sounded really exciting. And, the first thing that I'm hearing from the different officials that would be writing checks is, well, great, and let's have half of it be a powwow. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. These kids know everything there is to know about a powwow, and there's nothing in a powwow that actually reflects their culture. Not one thing. So what I did was I bypassed the tribal officials, and I went to the senior center, and I was talking to the 80 and 90-year-olds who at that time, I mean, they'd all be 100 years old today if they were still here. There might be one or two that actually are. And these people, these 80 and 90-year-olds at that time, they were the last generation that had been taken out into the woods when they were 8, 9 years old and 11 and 12 years old and instructed in the traditional culture of that tribe. And when they started to lay it out, this is what is traditional for our particular tribe. I mean, I could put on a potlatch that's very traditional for the Tsimshian people, but for Western Washington, I'm not going to know all of the details. When they started laying out, this is what you're supposed to do. And they were really happy, by the way, to be doing this. They were really happy to just be passing on what they knew. And they actually started coming into the classrooms and helping to teach the kids different songs and things that would go with this event that we were producing. We chose a potlatch because there's almost every aspect of our culture is in the potlatch system. The food, the song, the dance, storytelling, it's all there. Protocol, everything is there. And this is what happened. After we bypassed all of the, I'm going to blame the baby boom generation because most of these guys were baby boomers, but I can't really completely blame them because that was their grandparents that I was talking to. Their grandparents were the ones that knew the culture. They didn't pass it on to their children because they were being punished if they would. And so here are the baby boomers. They grew up in the 60s, and they're like, they're going to rebel against everything and be upset. And they'd picked up on this same idea, just like me being 5 or 6 years old, worshiping the sun because of some stupid little song. All these baby boomers had essentially done the same thing. They had picked up on the powwow. The powwow is the thing to do. If you do a powwow, you are cultural. You are Indian. This is what it means. And so they're doing this stuff. And of course they think they're right. And their grandparents are saying, actually, everything they're doing is wrong. So we had this event. And this is where my views on culture and the fact that culture is actually rather innate and that you grow up in it. And what the stories do is affirm it. They affirm it. When the crowd witnessed this event. Now this is a simple potlatch put on by children. So this is not like some really professional, really slick event like you might see, during the canoe ceremonies and things like that. This is kids doing what they learned over a 4 or 5 week period. But when the people in the crowd watched this, they were crying. I mean, people were bawling. And you've never seen anybody bawling because, maybe in South Dakota, but in Western Washington, you've never seen anybody go to a powwow and start bawling because, what they're seeing touches them and is so strongly. They were seeing sometimes subtle, sometimes very overt expressions of how they lived their lives every day since they were little kids. Every single day since they were little kids. I love powwows. I went to one yesterday, as a matter of fact. But there's nothing in a powwow that talks to me about how I've lived my life every day since I was born. But when I went to the ceremonies in Quinault this August for the canoe journeys, every moment spoke to me about how I lived my life. Every song, every dance. And that's what the stories also do. It's an affirmation of who we are. And it also explains it so that you don't have, my son will never be the stupid kid in the yard hearing a stupid song and saying, well, I got to do that because that's what Indians do. You know the difference because the stories explain it. They explain the meaning behind it. Why do we do things this way instead of that way? Sorry I took up so much time, but like I said, that question is